For those of you who don't know me to be a chutzpahdik person, I have this streak in me where I reach out to people whose work that I admire. I reach out to authors and thinkers, and leaders, and I write them emails that explain how much I admire their work and how I would really like to take them to coffee to get to know them. I'd love to meet them for lunch. And you wouldn't believe how many people respond and end up meeting me for a cup of coffee. One of the people that I've been lucky enough to get to know is our scholar in residence this morning, Professor Yonatan Adler. I contacted him because my work that I'm doing for my PhD is focused on Megillat Esther and its relationship with the Hasmonean period, the Maccabees. The first time that I explained it to somebody that this was my idea, they told me that it was two different holidays. I had told them I understood the holidays very well. Thank you very much. And still, I persist that the Maccabee signature is all over the Megillah of Esther. And so I was, during my research, introduced to a dissertation by an author by the name of Yonatan Adler, who wrote his dissertation on mikvaot from the Hasmonean period. And it was that dissertation that was the subject of our coffee on Emek Rephaim. And Professor Adler, in the opening moments, explained to me that he has a book coming out shortly called The Origins of Judaism, an archaeological historical reappraisal that really focuses in on this Hasmonean period. Now, I have to tell you that I'm going to introduce Professor Adler, but I'd like to frame this conversation just a little bit because we were talking about it yesterday, right? The discussion of how early or how late Torah Judaism can be found, right, isn't a negation or isn't in any way an argument that we shouldn't be listening to the Torah today. And it's not a claim that in any way the Jewish people did not exist earlier than the claim of when we were following Torah Judaism. And Dr. Adler is going to talk a little bit about that. And yet, I feel like if we're going to call adult education at Valley Beth Shalom adult education, then we also have to talk about Judaism as adults. And we have to bring in professors and thinkers and researchers who speak with adults and learn with adults, right? And this talk is like welcoming you to a Yiddishkeit 501 class, graduate thought in Yiddishkeit, right? And I think that our community is ready to participate in it. Professor Yonatan Adler is an associate professor at the Department of Land of Israel Studies and Archaeology Department at Ariel University, where he also heads the Institute of Archaeology. He studied Yeshiva Merkaz Harav, where he received rabbinic ordination from the chief rabbinate of Israel, subsequently earned his PhD in archaeology from Bar Ilan University. Dr. Adler was appointed in 2018 by the Minister of Culture to serve as a member of the Israeli Council for Archaeology. He has written extensively on the subject of archaeological evidence relating to the observance of Torah law, covering topics such as ancient ritual immersion pools, dietary laws, ancient tefillin found in the Judean desert, and chalk vessels used by Jews who observe the purity laws. Dr. Adler has directed excavations at several sites throughout Israel, most recently at Einot, Amitai, and at Re'ena, two sites in the Galil in the Galilee where Roman-era chalk vessel workshops have been unearthed. His book, The Origins of Judaism, an archaeological historical reappraisal, just released this week by Yale University Press. And this is the end of a book speaking tour that you've been on for weeks now throughout the United States and Canada. And I want to thank you in advance for making Valley Beth Shalom one of your last stops. It's an honor and a privilege to welcome Dr. Adler to Valley Beth Shalom.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Leibowitz, for the kind introduction and the invitation and the coffee. I'm sure that many of you, like me, find Jewish history and archaeology fascinating. But I have a feeling that for some of you, when you hear archaeology or history, your eyes start to glaze over. So the more detailed discussion, I think I'm going to leave for later on after the Kiddush, when we'll have a longer time for conversation. But right now, what I would like to focus on, rather than the past, is the present. But the present through the lens of the past. I am an archaeologist, so I still have to put that lens in. In our Jewish education, we're told that Jewish tradition, Torah observance, goes back, way, way back, many thousands of years. And this is true. Our tradition is very old, it's ancient. But something which generally isn't stressed is the early part of that tradition, the early part of Torah observance, the reception of the Torah amongst the Jewish people. And that's what I'd like to focus on this morning in the few minutes that I have. The biblical tradition, the story that we are told that we have been telling for over 2,000 years, is that the Torah was given by God to the Jewish people through Moses at Mount Sinai. And then what? What's the first thing that happens after God gives the Torah to Moses at Mount Sinai? While the Jewish people are still at the foot of Mount Sinai, golden calf. Okay? So immediately, we are told that the Jews break the Torah that they had just been given. And it only goes downhill from there. For the next 1,000 years that the biblical tradition tells us about, so we have from the time of the Torah's being given at Mount Sinai, for many, many hundreds of years, almost 1,000 years, until we reach the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, during the Persian period, 1,000 years after Sinai, we have a litany of narratives where again and again the Jewish people, we are told, are not keeping the Torah. This is what the prophets are railing against, that the Jewish people are not doing what they're supposed to do. Every now and again there is a cherished leader that brings the Jewish people back to observance, but it never lasts for very long. And this is something which generally isn't stressed in our Jewish education. The fact that in the beginning of Jewish history, our own narrative, the biblical narrative, is that the Jews don't keep the Torah. And this is perhaps a bit puzzling, a bit upsetting. If our tradition is based on God giving the Torah and then our having kept the Torah all these years, the first 1,000 years, people aren't keeping the Torah. I'm talking about the regular people, right? The masses, not the prophets or cherished leaders. I'm talking about the masses, the regular people. The rabbis were well aware of this, and there's a very powerful passage in the tractate Shabbat of the Babylonian Talmud, which tells that when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, he held Mount Sinai over their heads and threatened them that if you accept the Torah, all is well. If you don't accept the Torah, I'm going to bury you under the mountain, and this will be your burial place. God threatened the Jewish people, if you don't accept the Torah, you will be destroyed. And so, guess what? The Jews accepted the Torah. They had no choice. But it was only in the time of Achashverosh, in the time of Purim. Professor Leibovitz mentioned Purim before. In the time of Purim, the Jews returned and accepted the Torah, this time out of their own free will. And I think that there's a very powerful lesson here. The lesson is, and I think this is actually the lesson that the Bible is trying to tell us in all of these stories of non-observance in the earliest days of Jewish history. The lesson is that if the Torah and Jewish observance, Jewish identity, is based on force, if it doesn't come out of our own free volition, it won't last. It won't last. It will have no roots. It's only when we accept the Torah out of love, right? What was the story of Purim? The story of Purim is that God saved the Jewish people, and out of that feeling of love for having been saved, we accepted the Torah of our own free volition. I think this is the story that the biblical authors are trying to tell us, that it has to come from our own free will. It has to come out of love. If it doesn't come out of love, Torah observance will not last. I think this is a lesson for us, for ourselves, and in the way we educate our children as well, right? If we think that we can force observances or force anything that we do as Jews, either on ourselves or on our children, it won't work. It won't last. It won't have any long-term effects. It won't affect the soul. What I think we need to stress is the love of our tradition, the love of the Torah, and when it comes from that place, it has the potential to be long-lasting.